G'day, Nina. Here we are.
Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Episode 2.
Of 2025.
And are we struggling to be back into work?
Yes.
Yes,
The answer is
yes,
yes.
I'm
And it
definitely.
should be yes for everyone who's listening. Otherwise, you're lying to yourselves.
We did a fascinating thing at the beginning of this year, which was to actually come to our younger staff, the staff beneath executive and senior leadership group. And we did a survey. And we did a survey which wasn't answer A, B, or C. It was, here's a question. Tell us what you think. Can I say, not a lot of questions, incredible amount of feedback, some quite reassuring, some actually very challenging, but overwhelmingly enormously constructive and has allowed. We had an executive retreat yesterday, and we used throughout the 4 hour retreat the commentary that we got from people to either reinforce where we're going or to look at alternatives. And rather than make decisions, everyone agreed we need to go back. We need to now consult and go back. I know I've been doing this a long time, and I know I've been in the HR game for a long, long time, but I've never felt more empowered as a leader than having to listen and then to realise I don't have the answers.
But I think what's really telling, Andrew, is a lot of companies will use these surveys every year as just like a tick box exercise. And I've, met a lot of companies where they just use it as, yeah, sure. 70% of people say we're fine. That's good enough. No, they don't dig in deeper to the issues, but with your obligations under safety law, that's what you have to do.
And look, can I just say one of the things that came out of this is that I went and spoke to each one of the young solicitors because we did have about 20% of comments which were on the wrong side of the radar. And what I found is actually I don't know who they came from because it's anonymous, but there were some great advocates in the group who stood up. And when I chatted to the others, they felt the same thing.
Mm,
So when we look at our CPD, our development course, overwhelmingly there was criticism of it, that it actually wasn't interesting, it wasn't engaging, it wasn't teaching. Now, when I went and spoke to everyone as a result of the survey, I got some just fantastic commentary around it, quite rich commentary around it. And it happened in about 3 or 4 other areas. So look, I'm not a fan of big surveys. So if you have an one that has 140
yeah,
questions,
they never work.
you're wasting your time. You have tick a box A, B, and C. They never work. It's actually the rich information comes when you ask people just a few questions and ask them to tell you their truth.
Yep.
I was careful not to look at the actual individual response in case I could identify, and I got Nikki to assimilate it. But when I read it, it was incredibly helpful. And as the chair of the exec, it allowed me to actually raise a whole lot of questions and shut up and listen. And it was surprising how many of the comments that were agitated by the younger lawyers and the younger staff, remember all staff, were similarly agitated by members of the executive who felt it's empowered to actually respond to it and how we did it. So I just raised that. I think it's fascinating. It's been great for us. But remember, we got a 65% response rate, which showed we're not terrible, but not great, but it was statistically relevant. And we had such beautiful language describing our strengths and weaknesses. It really allowed us to be our best. So go for it. But please, not too many questions. Why don't we jump onto our first case today where we're talking about parental leave? And this is the Catholic religious coordinator case. I think it's called Naden and the Catholic Church. Tell us a bit of the facts of that, Nate.
Yeah, so she was a religious education coordinator who was returning from parental leave, wanted to go to part-time. So she's part of the executive staff, and they had a policy which said, look, we cannot accommodate flexible arrangements for executive members. But they kind of used that to say no, but then also went deeper and looked at reasonable business grounds. So they said, look, based on because she wanted to do it for only 2 terms,
Yes.
and it was going to be extremely disruptive to the students. It was going to be very expensive and onerous on other staff members as well.
And can I just stop there? Because this really, I mean, they offered alternatives in teaching at lower pay. They did a
Yeah.
whole lot of stuff. But for education, this is a really important case because it is the continuity of care and education
Yeah.
that goes to the heart of this case.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, what they said is, no, there are good business decisions because students need continuity.
Yeah.
The expense was very high and it was very disruptive.
Yeah.
And it would have required extra teachers and costs. And they upheld the refusal.
Yeah.
So I think in education circumstances, this case is a really important case and gives you a lot of really good guidance.
I think so because we're starting to see unions kind of push more and more for it. And the vein that I'm seeing is people kind of assume if I make a request for flexible work arrangement, you have to accept it,
And look, I think, Nina,
especially in schools.
I
Yeah.
think, Nina, one of the problems that we do have is that unions are now getting increasingly irrelevant, and they are chasing the edges of the law to have their biggest fights. And parental leave is one of the issues, and flexibility at work that they're really concentrating on.
Yeah.
And here is a school that actually got it together, built the business case, responded in the appropriate way, and they were successful, and they should have won.
Yeah.
You know, look, I want to go on to another case, which is dishonesty and safety. This is Manjit's case.
Yeah, this is
Another
really
bus driver
funny.
case. This is the guy who. I want to tell the facts in my way. You can tell the truth, all right? This is a guy who took both hands off the wheel and used his mobile phone and said he was turning his diary. Didn't put in the brake in his bus when he was like this is and then he told lies in court. That's what the court found. So the commission found was Reardon, who was the commissioner, who said, if this guy says if I was using a mobile phone, I should be sacked, I agree with him.
Yeah.
And you're sacked effectively.
It was pretty funny.
But the heart of this is safety has a really important role in managing performance and behaviour. And obviously it goes to safety, but there must be good process. Mustn't there? And in this case, he knew the rule.
Yeah, and they did a show cause process and investigated it as well.
Yeah. And then, not only that, they had video of what he was doing, which demonstrated that his manufactured excuse of looking for a diary was just so improbable, couldn't be true.
But the crazy thing was, he didn't even use that excuse during the show cause process. No. It only came out when he brought the claim. And he even made a reenactment video, and the commissioner was like, no, that's clearly a mobile phone. And he purposely didn't bring a mobile phone during the hearing as well, so they couldn't look at it.
Yeah.
So
Nina, this brings back the old evidence phrase called recent invention, where somebody says something which is different than what they said before.
Yeah.
And when looked against the facts is improbable.
Yeah.
It is evidence of untruth or a lie.
Yeah.
So this is a case where the nature of the evidence he created sat in contrast to what he did before. This is classic recent invention.
Yeah, he was trying to rewrite his history.
Yeah, and can I just say that's why it's so important to get the process right at the show cause stage, to document, to give opportunity to respond. That's why it's critical, because when people manufacture stuff afterwards, you can go,
Yeah.
All right.
I think, one other thing. The reason this all came about is actually because he claimed he'd had a workplace injury, and they were investigating that when they found out the misconduct. I think sometimes this happens to people and they're like, oh, I can't touch that because he was injured and that means I can't act against it. So long as you separate it, there's no risk of an adverse action claim.
Yeah, and remember, always keep the decision maker clean from what the alternate arguments or prohibited arguments would be. That's called quarantining the decision maker.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about the anti-bullying case of Chris Lewis. This a guy worked in the gym, felt he was being managed inappropriately around rosters and around opportunities to work. Eventually terminated for his behaviour towards employees, had brought one anti-bullying claim.
Around shift allocations. They sorted that.
Yeah. Second one he brought, but he'd already been terminated, so there was no jurisdiction to make the bullying order.
Yeah, so he got terminated basically after the hearing, but pre the decision being released.
Yeah. And so, interesting timing.
Yeah.
Very interesting timing. But I thought the commentary that was made by the Commission was really interesting.
Yeah, it was good.
So talk a little bit about what the Commissioner said about how you manage safety concerns.
Well, I think the Commissioner looked at a couple of things and said the fact that they were complaining about the shift allocations doesn't constitute bullying because it's reasonable management action. But what they failed to do is when he made complaints about various things, including safety, they wouldn't respond to it or were really, really late in responding. That is not a breach, but the failure to address the safety concerns when they arise and kind of ignore them. And I think they went one step further and basically said to him, you should stop making complaints about how we do things or it won't look good for you.
And can I just say, there's a classic general protections claim.
Well, he's filed an adverse action claim.
Yeah, which is not surprising.
Yeah.
But the other part is, what I liked about this is we so often don't see the Fair Work Commission understanding jurisdictions external from the Fair Work Commission. This decision highlighted the importance of safety and responding in safety in accordance with safety regulation. and earmarked, you've done this. This is a risk. This is also a Fair Work Act risk. This is a general protections risk.
Yeah.
So this is a good case where a person didn't get the remedy they sought.
No.
But by them failing to respond in an appropriate manner, they have created risks in other jurisdictions. And certainly in safety law, although it's unlikely they'd be prosecuted, if an inspector did turn up, there would be certainly an improvement notice issued on this issue. And in general protections, we'll wait and see, won't we?
Yeah, they've basically set up the claim with the evidence.
Yeah. Okay. High income threshold.
I think this one was funny.
Yeah, can I just... High income threshold is an interesting thing, but prior to this, there was a case probably 20 years ago that I did with DPI sitting about what is the effect of salary continuance. And salary continuance was seen as part of an employment relationship, but not part of an employment contract, if that makes sense. So there is old law that sits behind this case. This is a person who was on about $190,000, but had been on salary continuance for a period of 3 months, which meant he's on $168,000 beneath the high income threshold. He sought to take the advantage of being beneath that as to the terms and entitlements he could enjoy.
Yeah, he sought to claim that you calculate it based on the average of the previous 12 months instead of your salary at the time of dismissal.
Yeah, but he sought to get the benefit of being under the high income threshold.
He could file it.
Yeah, which allowed unfair dismissal claims, that allowed all sorts of benefits and award back. And the Commission was really clear about it in the end and said, look, this isn't an averaging process. This is what you are entitled to be paid, whether you were paid it or not. And therefore you're outside and you are above the high income threshold. Therefore you don't enjoy the rights of unfair dismissal. So I'm raising it as a case. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because there's nothing magical about it. But be aware that when we're looking at high income threshold, we are looking at legitimate parts of a salary that make up that high income threshold, and it doesn't matter whether they enjoy, this goes to workers' compensation, whether they fall under it, is what they are entitled to that creates the threshold. Right.
Drug and alcohol policies.
Drug and alcohol policies. So this is Witherton and DP World. DP World must be the most unsuccessful litigant in the world, you know. Every major case we deal with, if we go back to...
Maybe we just don't hear about the successful ones. I think they just are a litigant, like a repeat litigant.
Well, they've got the Maritime Union on the other side,
yeah.
So it's not easy. But this, again, is a really interesting case. You know, drug and alcohol policies, if they go back to the old New Zealand Airlines case, is this. You have a drug and alcohol policy that identifies what is the intention and purpose, which is to prevent someone who's affected by drug and alcohol in creating a risk to themselves or others. It's meant to be educative, rehabilitative, and it's got to be clear. Now, this decision is candidly a really deeply flawed decision, because part of it talks about, well, there was metabolites present rather than the actual drug, and you didn't say that in the drug. That's just bullshit, okay? That's just going way over the top of what has ever been expected in any other case, but does show us, depending on where our commissioners come from, their willingness to attack the policy. But what was very good about the decision is the idea is you're meant to be preventing risk.
Well, I think that's what they were trying to go for. It's just a roundabout way of explaining that.
Yeah, well, I think they chose a shortcut, which isn't a legitimate shortcut. But this really creates, this case throws into doubt the zero risk things of mining, where even the slightest presence of metabolite is a legitimate basis for termination. And what I did like about this case is it returned to what the intention of the legislation is, which is when we look at the clause under the regulations, it talks about a person being affected. Here, again, we're talking about the impact on a person, their judgment. They had a medical practitioner, an expert, who said, well, look, I can't see impairment, but there might be like a hangover.
Yeah, should we go into the facts? Because I think we skipped over there.
I just want to agitate the issue.
So that people know what we're...
I guess the things I want you to think about as we go into the facts of these, there is an increasing number of cases attacking drug and alcohol policies which are highly prescriptive and which are not followed by the employer, and it's beneficial legislation, so it will always protect the employer.
Yeah.
Therefore, I want you to think carefully, what are you trying to achieve in your drug and alcohol policy? Second, it talks about the intention and purpose is to look after the employee primarily, an educative and rehabilitative process. If that's not in your policy, I can tell you now, not now as much, but in 2 to 3 years' time, it'll be attacked successfully on that basis. And finally, you're looking at the risk of impairment. And in this case, actual impairment. And I don't think that's right. I think it is the risk of impairment. Okay, but go into
Interesting.
Can I say why? You and I have the same level of drug impairment. It may affect your judgment significantly more than it may affect my judgment. So it's
Yeah.
got to be the risk of impairment given the nature of the presence of a drug rather than
But
because,
wouldn't that also vary given the levels of impairment are different?
well, but that's the question, isn't it? If you can't objectively measure impairment by looking at somebody, what you can say is the presence of this drug creates this risk of impairment. Therefore, to be safe across my whole population of people, at this level, you are not to attend work. Okay?
But how do you determine what level it is?
Well, most drug and alcohol policies do have levels based on the nature of the chemical,
Oh, you mean literally state the
literally
level.
stated.
Right.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is this is not a great judgment, okay, but it does agitate some really important issues about what a drug and alcohol policy should be, how you should implement it, how you should train upon it, then how you should execute. So maybe talk about the facts now in light of all that conversation we've had,
Yeah.
and that'll shed a
Okay.
bit more light.
All right. So in this case, the employee was tested like a random drug and alcohol and tested for cocaine metabolite. I'd never seen that word before today. And when they went and spoke to the employee, they found out the employee had been going through some mental health issues and was using cocaine as a way to self-medicate.
So can I
But
just say, cocaine doesn't show up after 3 hours. It's metabolites that show up after that.
yeah,
So
so
as it breaks down as the
yeah,
metabolites.
so he had a specific rule where he would not take it within 24 hours of starting work.
Yes.
And so when they got the medical evidence, there was no cocaine left in his system. It was just metabolites. And like you said before, they said that they couldn't say whether he was impaired or intoxicated, just that he would have effects similar to hangover. And even the commissioner in the end, I think the deputy president said, I can't make a finding as to whether they were impaired or not, which is why they went down the route where they said, look, the drug and alcohol policy doesn't disclose that it tests for metabolites, which it should. Well, this is what the deputy president said, and for that reason, they threw it out.
That's complete bloody nonsense because the fact is it's the same drug, it's just how the system breaks it down. The issue in which is the real issue is, are you saying you must not have anything in your system? This is the classic THC
I think they were trying to
issue.
say, yeah.
Or are you saying it's got to be based on impairment? And I think this is what I'm trying to agitate is there is a growing consensus that zero measures is reasonable. Okay, I think that most
depending on the workplace.
yeah. But even then, I think the presence of THC 24 hours afterwards, and THC lasts for days, but it has no impact on the person at all. There's no evidence it impacts them at that stage.
Yeah.
So I think as we become more eloquent around how drugs impact us, and I think the whole THC medical cannabis thing is starting to elevate this issue.
It's definitely increasing.
Yeah. Anyway, look, fascinating discussion, interesting decision, and I think we can see a trajectory there. That's what I'm saying. Can I go on to the next case, which is work trials? And it's an issue which causes us problems where it's very common now for many people, particularly in country Australia, to say, oh, I know Nina's daughter, so yeah, Nina, you can come work at the pharmacy, or you can come and work. And we're already dealing with a prosecution that relates to a potential prosecution relating to a 15-year-old child who's injured. This is a case where the Fair Work Ombudsman would be deeply concerned. Before we get to the safety part of it, there is now abundant case law that says where a person does a trial, you must treat them like an employee. You must induct them.
You must pay them.
You must pay them. You must train them.
Yeah.
You must know they're competent in the types of risk.
Yes.
And remember, the risk profile of a child is significantly higher than of an adult in the sense that they haven't got that life experience that tells you it's highly risky to do so. In fact, with boys who are 15, the risk profile's off the charts because they're likely to take more risks and unlikely to talk about it. So maybe talk about the facts of this case and we can come back. But I just want to say this is not a case about non-payment, but I think Nina and I would repeatedly say to you, you must treat them like an employee. And there's Fair Work Ombudsman cases about work experience in law firms. And
particularly now with the new wage theft laws, like there's going to be way more strict at enforcing it as well.
Yeah.
So
let's come to the facts then. What do you reckon?
So this we'll call him the employer, though he disputed that, came to an employee's house and offered a role to their daughter and said, you can come and try working for me as involving sheep shearing. So she agreed and she undertook some work in the morning, a couple of hours, and then she was in the car heading to another work site when unfortunately she got into a fatal accident. Her mum brought a death benefit claim of around $860,000, and the employer disputed and said, look, she's not a worker. It was essentially a trial, and there's a high court case on this issue where alleged employee was doing some painting and they found she wasn't covered as an employee, so therefore there should be no compensation payable.
And what did the court find here?
That it was distinguished because in that case, it was more the person trying to show off their services and offer almost like a charity, whereas this girl in this case was doing the work of like a normal employee.
That's right.
And it had been set out clearly that the intention was that she would be working for the employer.
So can I use an example? I'm offering you a job and I say, Nina, look, come in and here's a series of problems and demonstrate them to us, how you'd respond to it. Okay, as part of Nina comes in as part of that, trips over on the way. Definitely public liability, okay?
Definitely something I would do.
Definitely not workers' compensation. But if I say to Nina, and there's a series of cases around this, come in and we'll provide you with training so that you can be an employee. At the stage you offer and say that you can be an employee by doing the training, you're an employee because you're undertaking work as part of.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be training, just undertaking work that you would normally have an employee do.
Yeah, I'm just showing how far it goes though. It includes educating someone to be an employee. But if you're standing in the shoes of what an employee would be doing, you are an employee any day of the week.
Yeah.
And that includes kids who are at school who come in and work for a couple of hours.
Work experience,
all of them.
Volunteers as well.
Yep. All right.
Yeah.
Why don't we go on to the major topic? This major topic, can I say, looks as boring as batshit, but
What?
Oh, sorry, it's second week. But it's really interesting because it's talking about reasonable management action and probably...
I think it's very relevant.
Yeah. The most notorious difficulty of reasonable management action, and that is dealing with a person who is highly sensitised and doesn't respond well
to feedback.
So talk us through the facts and then let's break it out, okay?
Yeah, I think the facts are very convoluted. I think there's quite a long case, but I'll just condense it down to the main key bits. Essentially, this employee worked for the NDIA, had recently come back from a period of workers' compensation where he'd been diagnosed with adjustment disorder, anxiety, stress-related things. His role involved dealing with customers, and basically while he was working, the department received several ministerial complaints about how he dealt with customers. It was pretty bad. So they were trying to performance manage him, and they had regular, essentially, reviews where you had to rate the performance, and he wasn't very happy with how they rated him because they told him he needed to improve. So he continually sought internal reviews, and each time they said no, that's what it stands for. Similarly, his manager was managing his performance, and as a result of that, he filed a workers' compensation claim based on two incidents. One where she allegedly went off at him because he'd sent a blank template instead of the one that he was supposed to send, and also he said that her behaviour suddenly changed when she'd been telling him he'd been doing really well, and she started being very aggressive and mean to him when she was speaking to him about the complaints. Medical evidence found he definitely did have an adjustment disorder, stress and anxiety, but it originated from the performance management action. So Comcare denied the claim at first instance because it was reasonable management action.
Yeah.
And so it went to the tribunal, who found, yes, we agree with the medical advice, he definitely has a condition, but it originated from the reasonable management action, so it's not compensable. And also the medical evidence found that he had personality condition, I think they said it was, where he was quite sensitive to feedback, and based on that condition would reframe it in his mind as bullying and being targeted and stuff, whereas it was completely warranted and reasonable.
Okay, and can I say the interesting part of this case is this is right on the borderline of high-level risk in new law, okay?
New law.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the new law, which is Alicia and safety law. But what this shows you is if you follow a process, it's a good process. You can be robust. At times you can fail a little bit, but if what you're doing is doing what is, reasonable management action is two fairness. Are you dealing with a problem that is a problem? So is it fair, your assessment what the problem is? And is the method by which you're dealing with it fair? Then it's reasonable management action. It doesn't have to be perfect. Different regulators around Australia in workers' compensation, it's not as easy as that because the Victorian regulator will immediately say not reasonable management action if you sniff during a thing. Whereas New South Wales and Queensland are much more robust. So each jurisdiction is a bit different. And in the bullying jurisdiction, where reasonable management action is a complete defence, the Fair Work Commission will allow quite robust behaviour still being. In other words, if someone's aggressive to you to say, you need to stop it, don't speak to me like that, would be taken as reasonable management action because you're responding to wrong behaviour. So there is a problem that sits jurisdictionally between workers' comp insurers, and there is a significant difference between the bullying jurisdiction where it's a complete defence and workers' compensation. But I guess the reason I've got it here is slightly different, and that is we've just had Alicia's case on psychiatric damages. We've just had the beginning of a prosecution of the Victorian Building Authority, and this is where they meet, where you're aware of a person's psychological profile and risk, and you continue to run the same process. And you run the process, and this is not what happened in this case, but you run the process where there is a knowledge of harm. You're right in the Victorian Building Authority safety, reckless endangerment area. And you're right in Alicia's case, new psychiatric damages. If I knew during the process of disciplining that I did something that could cause harm to a person that is of psychiatric nature, there is no reasonable management action test in it. Okay? There is reasonableness in the sense that it's a breach of contract, and therefore if your behaviour is reasonable, it will be a defence to it. But once you have a knowledge of harm, to continue to do it in the same way would give rise to Alicia case psychiatric damages. They're massive. If this person doesn't come back to work, they're a $100,000 employee. You've got general damages and loss over $1 million. Admittedly, workers' compensation insured, but people are bringing these claims quickly, as Tom and I talked about with Alicia's case in the Workplace Watch. We are now having a lot of people starting to bring these claims because of what they are, and we're now having people going to the regulator saying they knew that I had a psychiatric problem, they knew it related to my performance management, and they continue to do the same thing in the knowledge that it harmed me. That's reckless endangerment. That's why we're agitating this case, because the reasonable management action is fascinating, and it's a really good thing to know. But what I want you to know is what seems like a simple case is suddenly, after Alicia's case in the VBU, become a much more complex case when you become aware that the nature of management of a person could cause them harm. Step back, reanalyse, regroup, and do it in a way that is safe and documented. That's my comment about the case. Why don't we go on to the case study?
Yep. All right.
Over to you, Nana.
All right, so Gus was tired. He'd worked several long shifts as a contract manager supervisor for Clever Kids Builders, CKB, as subcontractors sought acceleration variations to complete 2 childcare centres before January 1 opening with pre-booked children. His hours grew longer and more demanding. There were many demands upon him. Not only was he employed by the principal contractor to manage the builds, but he also had to deal with complex site meetings with the owners and subcontractors. Everyone wanted the work done, but everyone also wanted to be paid more. His job was to stop the budget blowout caused by the demands of others and somehow find a remedy. It seemed insolvable to him. He became increasingly irritable with his family and colleagues and struggled to sleep. He told his boss Neil that he felt on the edge. Neil told him to wind it back. There were only a few more weeks to go. Neil confided in HR that they needed to watch Gus as he might blow a valve. Gus, the site supervisor under the building contract, approved 2 acceleration variations involving significant overtime for 2 subcontractors. Neil was furious. Yes, it was within Gus's delegation, but Christmas was a tough time for cash flow. Neil confronted Gus and told him how inappropriate it was. Gus snapped, calling Neil an ungrateful a-hole and telling him to get effed before storming off home. When he returned to work the next day, Gus seemed drugged, subdued, and almost vague. Neil asked him if he was okay. Gus just grunted, "You did this, mate. Now I'm on Valium, and goodness knows what else. You're killing me." Neil proceeded to hold a disciplinary meeting with him, but just before he could say, "You're terminated," Gus exploded and walked out.
All right, interesting set of case. By the way, coming from my old building and construction lawyer base, a lot of this is real, so that's not a bad start.
Yeah.
What's our first question?
Were there any workers' compensation risks, and what were they? Oh, yeah.
Well, I think you
I think
can
that's
say
obvious.
that Gus is a winner there, isn't he?
Yes.
He's got workers' comp and
So many psychological hazards.
yeah, so many hazards in there and no reasonable management action at
Yeah,
all.
and he's also raised it as well, and he's displaying clear signs. Yeah, nothing.
And can I say that takes us to the second question is, is there a chance of
Psychiatric damages.
This is a licious case. So this is, you knew what you're doing. You know the harm that's being done. You can see the harm occurring. It did happen. I'm afraid that's an own goal. Very, very easy to get psychiatric damages out of that. So that's a common law claim which should be brought on behalf of your workers' compensation legislation. No trouble in getting up and running. What about discrimination and general protections?
Yeah, I believe so. He's raised concerns, and the Neil's acted against it.
Yeah, not only has he raised the concerns, but he's told you it's impacting his mental health.
Yeah.
Moreover, he said it's unsafe.
Yeah, they haven't provided a safe workplace.
So for general protections, he's home on not safe. He's home on raising an issue which, from Suncorp, Suncorp case, there is no doubt that Neil knew or ought to have known that this was impacting his mental health.
Yeah.
And he has then directed him, in spite of that, to do something.
Yeah, but the final incident is when he takes action against him because he's come to work drugged, subdued and stuff as a result of the stresses at work. So he's being directly punished.
He is, totally, yeah. So that takes me to your area of speciality.
Safety risks. Yeah, no, I think if anything happened to him, so say he walked out and, got hit by a car or something.
This is reckless endangerment.
Yeah, reckless endangerment, but also I think industrial manslaughter. It's pretty bad.
It's not. I don't think it's close, but it's definitely reckless.
He's been doing it for a long time. He's showing signs. He's come to work in that state with me, and they've deliberately.
Don't you work for the regulator? That's over the top. Okay, and just for fun.
If he was dismissed, yes. Yeah. Unfair dismissal. There's no reasonable procedure. There's no valid reason.
No. There you go. We've done it. Can I say that's it for this week?
Cool.
Okay. Well, look, can I... I think we should just say I'm nearly dying in this process. I've got 3 cameras looking at me. I'm not used to 3 cameras.
We're getting used to it, but give us the thumbs up to keep us going.
Yeah, because it's getting better every time and we're doing it for you. Here's cheers.
See ya.